Hi, welcome to another 5-minute Friday fiction. This week I am featuring an excerpt from Oxford Cottage, which was my first novel that I wrote. It starts with some previews of Lizzie's life when she was young. It goes through a time period where she meets Darcy. It completely changes how Pride and Prejudice goes because it starts with them meeting before there was even an assembly. So there's quite a few changes to it. So don't expect a canon version at all when you do it. And it does end with a little bit of information past when they get married. So let's just set my timer for 5 minutes and then we'll get started. Oops. There we go. Chapter 1, April 1811. It had been a frustrating day. Fitzwilliam Darcy and Charles Bingley had set out from London just as the sun was creeping its way above the horizon. They had ridden hard ahead of the carriages that were bound for Netherfield. The servants would see to the unloading of their things as they paid a visit to the office of Bingley's solicitor, Mr. Phillips. Darcy had been impressed with the knowledge and the efficiency of Mr. Phillips. It was no wonder his uncle had recommended the man. Now, after following that man's directions, which had them wandering in what seemed like circles in a wood somewhere in Hertfordshire, they had been directed by a kindly gentleman to seek shelter from the coming deluge in a cottage located somewhere in that same woods. The spitting rain had left muddy trails down Darcy's greatcoat as it mixed with the road dirt. Keeping to the right branch of the road as the gentleman had instructed, Darcy found himself riding up a path toward a stone cottage. "I think this is the cottage," said Darcy. "I do not see any other," agreed Bingley. Darcy saw a young woman sitting beneath a structure made for storing firewood. Her bonnet hung down her back. She brushed a stray strand of hair the color of fine chocolate from her face with a gloved hand. Then she returned to the task of removing soil from her gardening tools. Darcy and Bingley dismounted and walked toward her. Elizabeth was intent on getting the dirt removed from her tools before storing them. Her father had given her a challenge, and she was determined not to fail. She batted a curl that had, as was its wont, worked its way free from her pins and fallen into her face. The soft dripping and dropping of the rain on the roof of the wood stand was relaxing. She was glad that she had gotten the last of the seedlings transferred to the flower garden, tucked under the protective blanket of straw before the rain began. She worked as quickly as she could, wishing to be inside the cottage before the rain started in earnest. She knew that the roof over her head and the walls that faced the prevailing winds would keep her dry while she worked, but she did not relish the thought of rushing through a downpour to reach the house. She would just bide her time in the wood stand if it were not for the fact that Jane and Mary were expecting her to help with dinner preparations. So deep in thought and so concentrated on the task at hand was she that she jumped when she heard his voice. "Good day," called Darcy as he and Bingley approached her. The young woman jumped to her feet in surprise, a rake clattering to the ground. He halted a distance from her and said gently, "My apologies. I did not mean to startle you. We were told that we might find refuge from the rain at Oxford Cottage." He swept a hand toward the house. "Is this Oxford Cottage?" Elizabeth smiled. There was only one person who could have sent these men to her cottage. "Indeed it is, sir. My sisters and I would be happy to provide shelter for you until the rain passes." She retrieved the fallen rake and tucked it, along with her other tools, behind the woodpile against the structure's one wall. "Your horses may take refuge here." She indicated a rail where the horses could be tied, then walking to the far end of the woodpile, she retrieved a pail of rainwater. Darcy watched her offer the pail of water to each of the horses, stroking their necks and cooing to them softly. She was captivating. There was no way around the fact. His heart had lurched, actually lurched, inside his chest when she had smiled at him. Now, witnessing her tender care for his horse, his prized possession, the stallion that he had raised and trained from a colt, he was well and truly lost. "Allow me," he said as he took the pail from her and carried it back outside the structure to collect the water. Her fingers brushed his briefly as she allowed him to take the pail. Bummer. She shook and stretched her hand as she tried to stop the sudden tingling sensation that coursed through her fingers and up her arm. "If we wish to enter the cottage before the torrents begin, we need to hurry." Snatching up the hem of her skirt slightly to avoid some of the mud, she walked quickly toward the cottage. Had she been alone, she would have raced, but since she was in the company of two handsome gentlemen, she tried to maintain some modicum of propriety. Elizabeth called to her sisters as she took the gentlemen's coats and hats and placed them near the fireplace in the sitting room. The rain had not been heavy, but their outerwear was damp and needed drying. Besides, it gave her an opportunity to study the gentlemen surreptitiously. And that is the end of our time, and just the very beginning of what I think is a fairly fun little tale. Has some kidnapping and bad guys in it and things like that. Very smart Elizabeth, although she is underneath, she's scared. It's a little bit hard to see maybe that she has that flaw, but if you look for it, it's there. Anyway, hopefully I'll get to see you again next week with another excerpt. Hope you enjoyed this one. Bye.